Hi, I'm Hobbs, and let's talk about Halo.
Neighbors coming. Get ready to play. Get ready to play, Wes. Get ready to play.
S3, one shot. Neighbors no shown. I didn't play it. He caught it.
You gotta jump off with that, man.
It's...
Are you fucking kidding me?
Back between around 2008 to 2010, moments like this would happen all the time. Whether it was some fantastic movement by I Got Your Pistola, or BR outplay by Ogre 2 or Roy, or sometimes those electrifying sniper shots from Snipe Down, everything was always interesting and everything was always popping off. But it's 2019, so the golden age, or what I like to call the golden age of Halo, was 9 to 11 years ago. So where are we now, and how did we get here? How did we go from Halo 3, which I will argue is the best Halo game of all time, to Halo 5, which I think is Halo losing its roots? I don't think that what Halo is right now, or at least in Halo 5, not counting MCC, is really Halo. Now, to many people, this may seem a bit dramatic. I mean, it's not like Halo's gone. Halo's still here, and especially to new players, it might seem like I'm just being way too dramatic for what the reality really is. But I think over the course of this video, I can start to explain why I think Halo 3 is the best Halo of all time and why it's fallen off so much. Okay, so this video is going to be divided up into 4 different parts. The first part is going to be the golden age of Halo, which is going to talk about Halo 2 and Halo 3 primarily. Then I'm going to go into Halo Reach, because I think Halo Reach was such a unique game. And then I'm going to go into the disappearance of Halo, not the death of Halo, but the disappearance of Halo. And then the last part is going to be hope for the future and what can be the future of the franchise. There tends to be a lot of arguments surrounding which Halo was better, Halo 2 or Halo 3. And I'm sure that I've already pissed off some Halo 2 people because I've already claimed that I think Halo 3 is the best game. So if you are one of those people who prefer Halo 2, there's nothing against you. I have my own reasons for why I think Halo 3 is the best game, so I'll lay those out. I'm gonna have to start off by first explaining the obvious experiential bias here. I was just 9 years old when Halo 2 came out, so I didn't have Xbox Live, and my experience with the game was pretty limited to just the friends I was playing with. Obviously, even when Halo 3 came out, I was still pretty young, but I played that game for hundreds of hours, and my knowledge of the game, therefore, is just much higher. Okay, so with that out of the way, now I guess I can talk about why I think Halo 3 was a better game. The main reason is I believe Halo 3 polished the core mechanics of Halo. In other words, I believe Bungie really nailed it with the philosophy behind Halo 2 and how the core mechanics should be set up for Halo, but I felt like Halo 2 was still sort of the beta version of it. For example, Halo 2 introduced the battle rifle, which to this day is still arguably the most important aspect of Halo. However, as what usually happens with first versions of things, I felt like the Halo 2 BR was somewhat off the mark. Personally, it felt a little clunky and weird to use, and also the BXR mechanic I felt was just a version of cheese rather than skill. Now, if I haven't already pissed off the Halo 2 crowd, I definitely have now. A lot of Halo 2 players consider Halo 2 to sort of be the Smash Melee of the Haloverse. With all the mechanics you can learn, such as the BXR, the double beat down, even the triple shot, a lot of Halo 2 players consider Halo 2 to be the most skillful of the batch. And I can definitely see their argument. If you have some game mechanics that can be replicated and they aren't RNG, then it would make sense that it just makes the game more skillful. However, I'm a little bit hesitant to give Halo 2 all of this praise for being more skillful. While there were many mechanics in Halo 2 that added to the complexity of the BR, I fear that it sort of drowned out a lot of the other mechanics of the game. For example, you could be really good with the BR, but really bad in terms of movement. But because the BR was so strong, if you got really good at all the tricks, your bad movement wasn't as damning to your play. I believe that in Halo 3 you kinda had to have the whole package. You couldn't just be good with the BR. You also had to be highly proficient at movement and map awareness and all of the other important things that make up the core of Halo. Now, while I definitely could keep going on about what I think the differences are between Halo 3 and Halo 2 and why I think Halo 3 is a better game, I think it kind of seems like an unnecessary civil war. The important thing here is that Halo 2 and Halo 3 established the ethos of what makes Halo Halo. A great formula was created with these games.
$20,000, 20 stacks, 20 large. No matter how you say it, that's what's on the line tonight.
Halo has always been meant to be a competitive game. As a Bungie developer summed up perfectly,
2 men enter, the better man leaves. The lesser man is respawning, and that's Halo.
Now, there's definitely a pinch of irony in this coming from Halo Reach, but the point still stands. However, this is where I fear people can get lost in some useless value judgments. When people hear that a game was made with a competitive vision in mind, they either celebrate or wince. I argue that while this subjectivity is useful for individuals, it doesn't really help to discern the actual quality of the game. See, I believe that it doesn't really matter if a game is made for sweaty or casual players, as long as they respect their own decisions. And I believe Halo 3 did just that. Whether you were in MLG getting sweaty or splattering scrubs in big team battle or running for your life in Infection, the core mechanics always stayed the same. The feeling of outplaying your opponent existed in all aspects of the game. This is a competitive format that works, and works for a game that knows itself to be a competitive title. I will talk more later on what this means and how this makes a game be preserved for a long time. However, just good game mechanics can't really hold up a competitive title. It also needs good maps for them to be showcased. Thankfully, Halo 3 had a lot of good competitive maps such as Pit, Guardian, and Construct. I think that when most Halo veterans think of Halo, they think of these maps. The most brilliant thing, however, was that the maps weren't just tailored to the competitive side. Because the core mechanics were always there, the maps for Big Team Battle, for example, were always so fun to play. Who can't remember all of the super fun Big Team Capture the Flag games on Valhalla, for example? Making a game that passes the test of time can prove to be very difficult. Even if you have all of the amazing core mechanics and maps, it could still flop. Along with those other necessities, the game also needs a thriving community to push the game into the future, and the game needs to provide the tools that lets the community do what it wants. Crucially, the Forge mode and the Theater mode were added to the game. The Forge mode allowed you to create maps and edit maps, and the Theater mode lets you play back your games in a sort of theater and edit them and have a free roaming camera. Probably the best use of the Theater mode was all of the great montages that were created. And again, the montages succeeded because they were celebrating and highlighting the core mechanics of the game. No one would want to watch any montages that showed off mediocre core mechanics that didn't take much skill. Now, while it's very tempting to keep talking about Halo 3 forever, I think it's finally time to start talking about the next game, which was Halo Reach. So you may be thinking, I just said that Halo 3 is the best game in my opinion, so why am I doing a whole segment on Halo Reach? I just think that Halo Reach is the most fascinating game to me because it sort of embodies this middle ground between where the Halo franchise has gone and where it was in the Golden Age. I remember watching all of the early Halo Reach multiplayer videos and trailers and be hit by a massively complex display of emotion. On the one hand, you have Bungie, who created classics like Halo 2 and Halo 3, coming out with a new game. And how could I not be happy about that? All logic sort of points to this game is going to be great, just like the past two. But when I started to see some of the new armor abilities that they were introducing in the game, I started to be a bit more skeptical. Were they trying to change up the classic Halo formula that they perfected? I mean, as much as I loved innovation and wanting a new game to feel fresh, it seemed almost too bold to try to go in this direction. And I can definitely say for certain that I was not the only one that was conflicted in this way. There was definitely a large variance of people that were more accepting and people were more pessimistic. A lot of the Halo 3 veterans, including myself, were very skeptical, thinking that this might actually ruin the series. And there were also Halo 3 veterans and other people who were very optimistic about the game. I mean, Halo 2 and Halo 3 all innovated off the past games and brought some new things to the table, so why can't they do it with this game too? At the time, there was a lot of controversy in the Halo community. Was Bungie trying to pander to Call of Duty players? While this may be true in some conception of how Halo was going, I think it's sort of an easy way out. Claiming that Bungie was just sort of up to no good and trying to find the easy way out completely ignores that Halo has been their baby for so many years, and it would make sense to try to affirm Halo and bring it to its natural end. We mustn't forget that Halo Reach was Bungie's last Halo, and as they said publicly, they wanted to go out with a bang. Unfortunately or fortunately, this meant changing some things up, making it be a standout game. So as I just stated, Halo 2 and Halo 3 both evolved off the previous games. However, the main difference with Reach is that they changed the basic mechanics of the game. They made gravity stronger, they made the jump height less high, they made the movement speed slower, but most importantly, they added armor abilities. However, even with all of these changes, I still felt like this.
2 men enter, the better man leaves. The lesser man is respawning, and that's Halo.
Was still true. So the question is, did they do it? Did they create another classic Halo? Well, yes and no. Even though I think they expanded on Halo and kept the fundamental ethos of the game, there was one major problem. They absolutely killed the competitive scene. Killed it. And here is where it becomes very important to remember what I said earlier. The developers must always remember what type of game they're making. And in this case, they're making a competitive game. So when you completely drown the competitive scene, the game's not going to do so well. So you may be asking to yourself, well, why was it bad competitively? This question could be difficult to answer since out of all the core mechanics of Halo, we don't know which ones can leave while still maintaining the competitive space. However, there were some mechanics that were changed that definitely contributed to the downfall of the competitive scene. In my opinion, the two biggest changes that had this effect were Bloom and maps. I can only think of maybe 2 maps that were suited for more of a competitive scene. I would say for sure Zealot and maybe Countdown. Bloom was also, I think, a terrible addition to Halo. It added a level of RNG to the game that was inherently antithetical to the purpose of Halo. And I could go on about all of the problems of the game, but essentially the competitive scene died out very quickly. Later in the game, Bungie tried to sort of revive some of the competitive scene by adding back an MLG playlist with no sprint and no bloom. But by that time, it was kind of too late. They were just sort of trying to patch up the holes that were inevitably the downfall of Halo. This is why I think that analyzing Halo Reach is the most difficult to do for any of the Halo titles. It's just all too easy to start to round to a moral binary when it doesn't really apply to Halo Reach. For instance, in Halo 3, because there was so much good about the game, it was easy just to historically label it as a great game. However, with Halo Reach, there's a lot of good and there's a lot of bad, and we can't just ignore that the competitive scene was effectively killed in Halo Reach. This is why I like to sort of consider Reach to be the inflection point of Halo. When 343 Industries took over the franchise, they had sort of 2 choices. They can keep going with some of the casual choices that Bungie made, or they can try to go back to the old Bungie games. They chose to go on with Halo being more and more casual, and that was a major mistake.
I'm here with my old teammate, Eric Snipedown Rono. Eric, first impressions of Halo 4 so far?
Well, in my opinion, I love the game. I think it's the best shooter I've ever played. I think 343 really stepped up, took over a game that was struggling, and they made one of the best shooters out there. It's the most smooth game I've ever played, and I've enjoyed every second of the game so far.
Out of all these weapons, maps, what's your favorite so far?
I think Adrift's pretty cool, and Haven, the one with the 2 streets.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of new maps, and like coming from Reach, that's really something that's really optimistic about this game.
Perfection, dude. I absolutely love it, man. Every single weapon is useful, and that's exactly what you need when it's like when we're trying to appeal to spectators and people who are watching from home. They don't want to see one weapon, they want to see multiple weapons, and that's exactly what Halo 4 offers.
So yeah, that might be the most embarrassing video in Halo history. Well, that said, that is hindsight, because during the time I was extremely excited. Here are all these Halo pros, some from even Halo 3, that are saying this game is, the best game ever. And I was really hoping for Halo to make a comeback as a strong competitive title. At launch, I thought there was not really any trace of the competitive spirit. With armor abilities coming back and even some new ones, I really didn't feel like this was the Halo I was wanting. Later on, 343 added a Team Throwdown playlist, and there was also a competitive league established called PGL. That started to bring some competitive life into Halo 4, but because Reach was so bad for the competitive scene, it was really hard to bring Halo back to life. Now obviously there's a lot more to talk about in Halo 4 to give it justice, but again, this is a very brief overview. For me personally, after Halo 4, it was sort of time for me to leave the series. I was really interested in PC gaming and wanted to build a PC for myself. So therefore, when Halo 5 started to be rumored and the teaser trailers and stuff started to come out, I was excited, but I was very skeptical. And what kind of put the nail in the coffin was this.
To me, a Spartan is speed, power, agility.
This vision, this myth of a Spartan as a superhero.
In typical Halo, you have the already awesome sandbox of the weapon, the melee, and the grenade. We wanted to add these Spartan abilities in as a 4th layer that everyone has, so it's equal footing.
They're baseline traits. Every single person who wants them can have them. You sprint as fast as the other players, you jump as high as the other players, you clamber like they do.
In some sort of sadistic humor, I guess, at the end of Halo 4, 343 was saying, yeah, we hear you that you don't want, these armor abilities that you can pick up, that you can have an advantage over other players and stuff like that. But then they proceeded to say, well, the solution is not to remove the armor abilities, is to make sure that everyone can have the armor abilities. To me, this is just an indication that 343 doesn't understand what Halo is. And I want to make it clear that innovation, or adding what the developer calls a 4th layer, may not necessarily be bad, but you need to recognize what the core mechanics of your game are. Halo is grounded in that simplicity that, if changed, completely disrupts the competitive environment. If there's any counter argument, I would say that maybe Halo 5 is not meant to be a Halo game. It's sort of like a spin-off of Halo that could be fun, but it's really not Halo. So there continues to be a lot of debate as to why 343 made these decisions. Was it just that they had very minimal knowledge of what made Halo Halo? Was it Reach's fault for sort of portraying a pseudo version of Halo? Was it the pro players' fault for sort of sucking up to what 343 was doing and not really speaking out? Or maybe pro players were speaking out and 343 just didn't want to listen. All of these things could be true. And you may be saying, well, hey, look, the competitive scene is still going with Halo 5. And yeah, that's true, but I feel like it's sort of forcibly preserved by Microsoft in 343, even if the mechanics aren't really there. And I think this really showed in their last tournament where Halo 3 was the competitive game and the hype just skyrocketed because Halo 3 is Halo and has the core mechanics that make up Halo. I feel like everything just sort of comes back around to Reach. Did Bungie really know what they were doing, or did they just create a Halo cop-out? Was it a calculated decision to put in armor abilities, or did they just want to blindly appeal to a larger player base? There isn't much evidence for this theory, but, it could be true. Maybe Bungie didn't even know about their own classic formula. And maybe it was just an accident that somehow they came up with one of the best FPSs in history. Now that we've sort of established a brief historical background of Halo, well, what about the future? Well, I don't know about any of you guys, but when I heard about this...
You are holding pizza, which means you have just confirmed MCC is coming to the PC. Brian Gerard is here from 343.
I was very excited. As I said earlier, after Halo 4, I switched over to PC, and I began playing games like League of Legends or Counter-Strike. Those games sort of itched the competitive cravings I had. Why? Well, they know themselves to be competitive games. Regardless, I'm super excited to be able to play Halo on PC. And now that it's also on Steam, that makes my hope even higher. So I guess the last question is, well, can Halo make a comeback? And I think it can, because like I said before, Halo has just disappeared largely. It hasn't died. And so it could always come back to the forefront of the scene. Now, an important question is, well, will it come back on console or on PC? I think if Halo comes back to its former glory, it's going to be on PC. The main reason for this is that I think that with Halo being on Steam, a lot of people are going to latch onto the old competitive spirit of Halo 3 and so on. The hype of the PC community could just explode into another competitive golden age. But ultimately, we're just going to have to see. You know, it could go either way. And also with Halo Infinite coming out in the future, we don't know if 343 is going to go back to their armor abilities or they're going to try to appeal to the core mechanics of Halo. However, regardless, we are getting the old Halos back, and I'm pretty excited about that.